Welcome, and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Jennifer Nana, the Public Sector Business Development Manager at Kodak Alaris. Jennifer, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've been talking so much about M1921 and FADGI throughout these prior segments here. I think this next conversation is really going to be forward-looking. And case in point here, M1921, some significant year-end deadlines that agencies are facing as a result there. As your organization helps agencies meet those deadlines under M1921, is there any talk about an extension of a deadline being given here? Because it's fast approaching.
Well, from what we understand, there's no extension of the December 31st, 2022 deadline. And some may be aware or not that the December 31st deadline is actually an extension of a prior deadline from 2019. Most agencies were not close to meeting the requirements, hence the extension itself. And coming straight from the National Archives website, I'm just going to speak on a little blurb here. They said that they're sympathetic to the challenges agencies are facing during the current health crisis. However, the targets set for federal agencies in 2022 are not imminent and do not require adjusting at this time. So, NARA and the Office of Management and Budget, which is of course the OMB, they'll continue to monitor the current situation as well, and they will be working through the crisis together. They'll coordinate any decisions on the M19 targets with OMB. And just keeping in mind that there is an application process for exemption cases. Exemptions or exceptions, they fall into 3 categories. And those categories are pretty much cases where replacing analog records with electronic systems would be burdensome to the public. And that's based on cost, that's based on time, efforts, and resources required, right? Then the second scenario would be cases where cost exceeds the benefit. And last case is where analog records cannot be replaced for some other reason, right? So that includes statutory or regulatory barriers. So that being said, exemptions will be based on several criteria in the form of a business case. These may include, cost of digitization and reference services, legal analysis on ownership and access, and time estimation. For how long the exception is actually going to be required for. It's also important, to note that just because your agency may deal with documents that have a required wet signature, it does not exempt them from the electronic submissions requirement. And that's a big deal. The impact across agencies to digitize it's enormous at this time. And exceptions are processed as one request that covers all records that need exemption. NARA and the OMB will make the decision, and the Office of the Chief of Records Officer will communicate the approval or the rejection.
Okay, yeah, some things that really jump out at me there is just that the pandemic, of course, underscored the value proposition of doing this, of making records digital and accessible, but at the same time also made that challenge a little more difficult, just given the reality of facilities being locked down for periods of time and inaccessible to get those analog records digitized. One other thread to pull on here, I think, is just that we have seen this play out with the real ID requirements, that they were postponed, they were delayed as a result of pandemic constraints. Do you see that case study being something that is relevant to our discussion here?
I would say absolutely.
Okay, and of course, on the flip side of this, we're talking so much about compliance and how agencies need to comply, but let me ask you this from a different perspective here. What are the consequences of agencies not complying, and how does compliance with this mandate impact budget for other technology related to digitization? Because these budgets can be stretched pretty thin sometimes.
I, I definitely agree with you there. The M1921 compliance is essentially an honor system. Self-certification, process of paper records, being submitted in electronic format. Just to quote again from NARA, they don't have the infrastructure to be hall monitors. They're pretty much letting us know from experience within the field, agencies are all over the map with regards to digital maturity. When most people hear of this, they assume a massive budget undertaking, right? But the reality is the right technology paired with the right process does not have to be that overwhelming for a funding standpoint. Part of the push to move towards a more paperless digital government rests in the fact that the federal government spends millions of dollars and countless efforts creating and storing records in paper form. Maintenance of this requires agencies to fund headcount across dedicated resources and investments in security, right? So think paper storage and disaster recovery, right? So all of this trickles down to the citizen level, and it negatively impacts the access to data. So when when looking at the full picture of records of digitization, we must first examine how much the manual process are costing us today, right? And how much we can truly eliminate by going digital. The mandate just put a sense of urgency around the government, and they've been trying to do this for years. It's something that it needs to be done, and it's beyond FADGI. This is something that needs to be done. For instance, here at Kodak, the FADGI bundle, we have two FADGI bundles right now. We have the I-5250 or the I-5850 with software and services to meet archival appropriate image requirements from the M1921. The bundle includes the DICE targets to ensure conformance and appropriate calibration standards, right? And they come with a certificate of compliance from FADGI and TAA compliance straight out of the box. So you actually get all of that together. Most importantly, within the context of budget concerns, the I-5250 and the I-5850 from Kodak Alaris can go in and out of FADGI mode. So yes, you can toggle this specific piece of hardware in and out of FADGI mode. Since FADGI requires a close to the original image as possible. So just to break that down, if you had a coffee stain on a document, they want that original coffee stain to be on that document as well, right? So to ensure your agency has a future-proofed set of investments that can handle both compliance and archival requirements and day forward digitization needs. So, if an agency is worried that we're going to buy this piece of equipment and we're only going to use it for FADGI, no, you're not. You can implement that into your day-to-day practice.
And what I'm getting a sense of here is that with FADGI, there are different requirements for different documents that, some more day-to-day documents that are just laser printed might not require the same level of rigor as some other documents where in that case you would want that coffee stain to your example. There's a level of rigor and more exacting requirements that you want in place for that document. Do I understand that correctly, or is there more to get into there?
They want the original image, right? So say for instance, I'm just gonna speak on say Thomas Jefferson was drinking a coffee and he spilled the coffee on this specific form that he signed, and he blotted it with a piece of paper, and that he blotted it with a napkin, and that coffee stain was on that image. We want that image. They don't care for the clarity of it. They don't care for to take certain things off of the document. They want the original. They want the document from its original state.
Okay, well, thanks for clarifying that. Just to go into more detail here on the topic of compliance, can you go into a little more detail about the technology compliance requirements that we're talking about here?
I want to touch base on Robinson Jr. versus McDonald. It's a suit that happened in the past, and it pretty much deals with a military veteran who pretty much they needed benefits, they needed health care, they needed help, right? And they stated that their forms were missing. This caused the veteran to be denied benefits, right? In any case scenario, that's a terrible situation. You know, a person fought for our country, they did what they needed to do, and now we're asking for help and they're getting denied, right? You know, this showcases the importance of an agency having a clear document management strategy around capture, storage, and retention. Um, Technology can be compliant. That is the easy component, but the execution and implementation may not be straightforward, right? So it may require some agency-wide cultural shifts, as well as process re-engineering. This is why speaking beyond FADGI it's literally critical. It's very, very important. The M1921 mandate really pushes a larger digitization strategy. It requires carefully planning and execution, right? So for instance, part of the mandate requires agencies to maintain a comprehensive and compliant records management program, right? So within this program, agencies must name a senior agency official for record management. Records management trainings must also be completed annually for agency personnel. So layer on top of that, the significant changes in the way paper is processed. And there's quite a bit of work to do, you know, to ensure the agency is setting up for future digitization in a strategic and efficient fashion. You know, setting up technology and process consultants to help agencies navigate the change is literally critical. So, you know, if you need help, you know, there are people out there that can help you, hence me.
Well, it's good to have a helping hand in all of this, but I just want to underscore that because I think it's a really important takeaway from this conversation is that fundamentally it seems that there's some agency-wide processes here that need to change. And of course, the technology piece of things we've underscored in all of this, but in terms of like the culture change of this, you know, that seems like a trickier thing to navigate.
Well, you know, I just want to bring up once again that this is bigger than FADGI, right? So I just want to give an example of FEMA, for example, right? So say, for instance, there's a natural disaster, and this actually occurred in my town. A tornado hit our town, right? And of course, everyone's properties were not hit, but some people were affected dramatically. FEMA set up a tent, and anybody can go to the tent and fill out a piece of paper and get benefits. The next day, they were receiving cash benefits. So with a records management system where things are digital and easily, like you can easily find this information, it could literally cut down the amounts of fraud and a lot of different things that are happening. You know, these are taxpayers' dollars that are going into helping other people when they're, you know, they're literally struck during their worst times, right? So imagine you go to get benefits and you were the person that were actually hit in a tornado, and they say that all funds are exhausted because a couple hundred people in front of you got funds and they really weren't supposed to. Like I said, a digitization strategy is critical. All agencies benefit from roadmap all agencies benefit from a roadmap implementation data strategy, right? Outsource the roadmap strategy, support on implementation, you know, record retention and governance, once again, is critical in a partner network.
My guest today is Jennifer Nana, the Public Sector Business Development Manager at Kodak Alaris. I'm your moderator, Jory Heckman, on the special bulletin review, Pathway to FADGI Compliance, sponsored by Kodak Alaris on Federal News Network.